I also love that you use the word momentum because I think people can understand they're looking to have positive momentum towards their goals. So that word is something that I think people can understand, that we are using the adjustments in rhythm to build momentum towards their goals and their body's healing. Hello, and welcome to Build Your Remarkable Practice podcast. This podcast is dedicated to chiropractors who are in the seasons of launching and building their practice. Join myself, Dr. Lona, and my co-host, Dr. Bobby, as we have conversations each week as it relates to building the practice of your dreams. And remember, you can have a remarkable practice as part of a remarkable life, not instead of one. We're here to lead you on the way.
What's up, team? Welcome back to the Build Your Remarkable Practice podcast with the amazing Dr. Lona Cook and myself, Dr. Bobby Elijastic. Dr. Lona, you are in Nashville at the moment. What's going on? Are you ready for a massive weekend?
I am ready for a massive weekend. I just heard that we're going to have over 700 teams and chiros here, so I'm pretty stoked about this event.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we have, guys, this weekend our live systems training in the US, conversion, retention, immersion. So 700 teams, 700 participants from around the US and probably Canada and other areas flying in, all to train on conversion, retention, and what we like to say, true conversion. So how do you convert people so they actually stay under care? So make sure you get to a live immersion. If you guys have never been to one, you'll absolutely love it. It'll blow your mind. I like to say it's 6 months worth of accelerated training that literally you get in a day and a half, or in this example, in 2 days' time. So definitely get to live immersion. We've still got our marketing attraction immersions coming up later in the year. We've got one which will be in the US, and then one which will be down in Australia as well. So we'll leave details in the show notes, but definitely get registered for live immersions. You will not regret them. So Dr. Lona,
I agree.
today we're going to
Bring your
shift
team
gears
too.
for a second.
You will want them
you and I were
to
talking
be there
about
hearing it with
something
their own
a little
ears.
bit earlier before we jumped onto this recording. And it's something that I, every single week on calls, will always see feedback from DCs around the world. They're like, how do I improve this? How do I get this right? And it's one thing that when you do get right and when you do improve, I like to say you'll instantly increase the volume of your office by 10 to 15%, literally like overnight. And that thing that we're talking about that we want to dive deep on today is the issue of compliance. So compliance is kept visit average, which means what percentage of your scheduled book or your scheduled people that are supposed to be coming in to see you today actually keep their original scheduled appointment. I like to say that compliance is the number one precursor to retention, meaning when your compliance is high, your retention will be high. But also, better results and outcomes live on the other side of good compliance. When people are keeping their adjustments, they're staying in flow, they're sticking to their care plan, they get better results and they get better outcomes. So I'm super excited to dive into this topic with you today about compliance. Dr. Lona, talk to us a little bit about compliance. I know you guys, from our conversations, do a great job at this. What are your thoughts on this? How is it something that what's the importance of it? And then what's some strategies that we can dive deeper into today's call?
I love that we're talking about this because this is actually one of my topics this weekend. And I feel like, Bobby, our 30-minute prep for this conversation just helped me get more clarity over what I want to share with the group this weekend too. Compliance doesn't feel like a sexy topic. And so I think sometimes as chiropractors, we overlook the importance of compliance to getting our patients the best outcomes. And so when we can relate that with, wanting to serve people and wanting them to thrive and truly heal, compliance is a necessary part of that discussion, which means you're making your adjustments happen in rhythm. You're not missing appointments. They're understanding, they're being educated at those visits so that they really can squeeze the juice out of chiropractic. So compliance, though it's not sexy, super important to a thriving practice, not only for the team and the business, but also for the patients to get the best outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. So let's talk into, I want to dive into strategies around this. Let's talk about the process of how do we ensure that we have high compliance. And first of all, what's a benchmark that we should be aiming for? So in the Remarkable Practice, we talk about that there's different levels of kept visit average, and there's gold standard benchmarks that you should be aiming for. So if you're listening to this, here are some of the metrics that we talk about. If you have a compliance of under 82%, which means you have 18% of people on average every shift changing, cancelling, or missing appointments completely, that's what we call a shrinking practice. So 82% compliance lower, you'll be shrinking. Between 82 and 87%, we call that a plateauing practice. So if we get 82 to 87% of people keeping their original schedule adjustments, that's a plateauing practice, which means no matter how many years you put in, you're roughly going to plateau, maybe you'll grow slightly. And then if we have a compliance above 87, and I personally like to aim for 90 plus percent, then that's a growing practice. Not only is it a growing practice, but in my observations, when I go through and observe officers and when I look at how they operate, the higher the compliance, the better that office works, which means better outcomes, better flow, people with happy smiles on their faces, team with happy smiles on their faces because people are actually keeping their adjustments. So we want to talk about what are the strategies, starting from literally like with a person starting care, let's call it day 2, your report of finding, that's going to really start to drive our compliance, our care visit average up above 90%. Dr. Lona, I know you guys do a great job of this. Why don't you take us through the journey in your office? How do you help ensure that your compliance stays super high and the people are actually keeping their adjustments?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make the assumption when I say like keeping your compliance high that you're doing things well off the bat with your new patients and giving them the proper report of findings and making those handoffs to your checkout CA so that there's good dialogue about getting them scheduled out, mapping their care out so that whenever possible, people are on the schedule where they should be as far as their frequency. So with that said, when, Bobby had said we're aiming to be in the 90% of kept appointments, that's looking at people who have scheduled out. And so even, today we look at like all the ways that CAs can follow up on appointments now that we have all this tech available to us, whether it's our EHR showing us who's missed appointments, the automated text that can follow up. Some of this is just knowing that you should be employing these bells and whistles that are available to you through the digital tech that's now a main part of our practice. So in our office, we have 30 minutes after a missed appointment, an automatic text would go out letting them know, like, let's get this appointment made up. One of the things that made a big difference in our office for getting us over that 90% consistently and even like 92 and higher was just making sure that there not only was an automated text follow-up, but that our check-in CA, the boss of today, she was like following up personally with those missed appointments and trying to get them made up still in that same day. So by making sure that there was multiple touch points on that visit, it ensured that we were trying to actually make that up within a time frame. So that was a big thing for us. Also coming alongside, especially a newer patient, let's say Bobby's a new patient in my office and he's missed an appointment or two, we will, with grace, come alongside them and say, hey, Bobby, we've noticed that you've missed the last 2 appointments that were scheduled at 10. Is there a better time in your day that we could schedule these appointments at so that we can actually get them at a time that you're able to be here on time? So there's ways to just know that you can have direct conversations with people without it having to feel like you're having a compliance conversation necessarily. So those were 2 things that made a big difference in our practice, is how we were going to address some of these things, and also how frequently or how soon after a missed appointment we followed up. And a lot of this is just, again, having those structures in place in your practice so that your staff knows what the expectations are to follow through on these things.
Yeah, 100%. So I look at this as, again, there's 2 ways that we should treat this. We can be reactive, which there's time and place to be reactive, absolutely. But the more proactive that we can be with setting intentions around compliance, the less reactive we'll have to be, right? So why don't you take us through, Lona, when somebody starts care, what are some strategies that you guys put into place immediately at the report of findings that enables you to be proactive in the front foot? I'm assuming that you have office policy around care visits, like office policy around mapping adjustments, office policies around, hey, if you're running late, what should you do? Like, you have to keep the adjustment at that time. Can you show up an hour later? Let's go to the start of the journey. So report of findings, someone started care and they've committed and they've said, yes, let's do this. What's the first steps that you guys put into place to start to future pacing? Go, you know what? We want to make sure this person gets the best outcome. So let's talk about compliance now.
So first steps would be the doctor giving a solid report of findings, like the expectations of frequencies over time, where the reevals should be taking place or the re-exams taking place in the care at 12, 24, 36 visits, etc. So that's laid out so that the patient understands what the frequency and the number of visits over a certain amount of time is. And once we've agreed upon that, now financial arrangements are made. The checkout CA really has to get those details mapped out, right? So if I'm someone that has a pretty consistent schedule, that might be really easy. And so it may be easy for her to say, all right, Bobby, let's find the best time for you in our adjusting hours so that we can ensure you have the time you want. Just know, if you are for some reason going to need to change an appointment, I want you to text this number and give us a heads up so that we can get that moved into a better time for you. You can always text this number. That will also confirm the appointments to you by sending you the day before reminder text, right? So that's part of it, is just setting the expectation of what's going to happen with the scheduling. Oh, you need to make something up, text the number or give us a phone call. We can get that changed for you. We also let people know, like, we're an efficient office. So if that means that you need to come 30 minutes later from your appointment, that's okay. Just give us a heads up text and we'll move you 30 minutes later. So we have made our procedures with the expectation that you're going to be making your adjustments, but also with the grace, knowing that you may have a soccer game that runs late, or you're a contractor and you might not get out of your project on time. We are here to make chiropractic fit into your lifestyle, not the opposite. And so I think that's part of having a very I just think clear connection with the patient about how do they go about doing care in your office for the long term. And also I like asking myself the question of could I make care work in my own office, right? Do we have capacity for me to get in with my kids after I'm done with work, or things like that, right? You've got to think about that when you're thinking about who your avatar is and how they're going to make these visits happen on paper and how you're going to follow up if they have to change appointments. And then you walk that out with them. So that happens for us on day 2 and day 3, that we're setting up the expectation of how does routine visits look like. If someone is not following through, we're going to address that right away and find a better time for them. We also let them know if they would miss more than 3 visits, they'd be off the schedule, and we'd certainly want to know, why they've maybe changed their plans there. So if we have to play that game with people where they committed to a schedule, but for whatever reason they've missed some appointments, usually the doctor will follow up first, especially if it's a newer patient. If they're not showing up on their 4th visit or their 6th visit or something like that, then it's that we have the doctors follow up, because we want to just make sure that we're having clear communication about, did something change, from when we had agreed upon things at the report of findings. Usually we don't have to do that as long as we have a good, well laid out plan of action at the report of findings.
Yep. I love it. So what I'm hearing you say is that you have structure, but there's flexibility in that structure. And I love that, because we do a very similar thing. So what I recognize, I'm going to share a little tactic with you guys now. Okay. I recognized this many, many years ago in practice, and I really started to work on this consciously and carve out mastery around it. And what it was is, I recognize that when somebody starts care at the report of findings, so when you have someone that commits to care and says, okay, let's do this, let's get started. At that point, after they receive their first adjustment, they are the most malleable, they are the most receptive to the things that are coming out of my mouth, because they have a vested interest at that point. In my office, when they say they've started care, they've committed to a financial plan, and usually the minimum they've committed to is a $900 upfront payment for month number 1. So what I started to recognize, Lona, is I wasn't consciously aware of what I was saying to people. So I used to say things to people like, great adjustment, go for a nice walk today around the block, get some movement in your spine, and we'll catch you next adjustment. And in my office, we've got maybe more than 180 degrees windows. We've got almost the whole office is windows. So I can see people on the street. And what they'd all be doing after their first adjustment is they'd be listening to what I told them. They'd be walking around the streets. So I was like, that's interesting. If I told someone on visit 28, oh, by the way, Lona, just after your adjustment, make sure you go for a walk. Right? I didn't tell you that up until now. There was less chance of them actually following through and doing that. So at that point, when I recognize people are really receptive after their conversion into care, I sat down, I thought to myself, what's the most important things that I would want someone to understand when they first start care? In other words, What are the most important things that if this person gets this and understands this, it has the biggest impact in them following through and getting great outcomes with their care? And what I recognize is there was two things. Here's what they were. First thing was if they just kept their adjustments. Now, I don't care if you're booked in at 4 and you rock up at 6. That's cool. I want to make it flexible and easy for you. But keep your adjusted rhythm schedule. The people who don't change, cancel, miss appointments get the best outcomes. That's the first thing that I recognized. I realized that if people are actually keeping their adjustments in flow, they get the best outcomes. That's the first thing. Second thing that I recognized is that people who get to the Better Result Faster workshop and understand certain principles around their body and what they can be doing on their own also get better outcomes. So when I recognize this, I introduced in my office what we call the two things script. Here's a little ninja move. We call this two things script, and it's delivered right after somebody has their first adjustment. So you've gone through the report of findings, you've reached them around time, energy, money. The person has started care, they've laid down, you've gotten them adjusted, and then they sit up, and it's the final part of your report, right? My two things script sounds like this. I'll say to people, now, Lona, we've been through a lot of information today. We've covered a lot of key topics and key information. Do you have any questions for me? People usually say, no, all made sense, or they might have a question. And they might say things like, oh, what about my pillow? I want to talk to you about my pillow or about my work desk. Okay, and they might have a question like that. Okay, so they've got these questions. And my response to them is always this. So for now, there's two things I need you to understand, just two. And I literally hold up two fingers so they can see it visually. And here's what they are. Number one is 3 times a week means 3 times a week. So your compliance to care is the number one thing that's going to influence the outcomes that we get. So we're going to have a look at the team at the front now, and they're going to find the 3 times that work best for you. They're going to map that out, and then they're going to work out which day you want to drop when you graduate to twice a week, and they're going to get that schedule all set up and organized. Now, once those times are set up for you, we don't want to change, cancel, or miss appointments. It's the number one thing that will break your flow, slow your momentum, stop us from getting the outcomes. Does that make sense? And I check in with the person so that I get a verbal yes agreement. And that's what I'll add in. Now, we're super flexible. So if you're running late, if you're running early, if you need to shift it around, say, don't stress, okay? Our team can get that organized for you, but get your adjustments in rhythm. Super critical now, okay? And I get an agreement there. Does that make sense? I want a clear yes, that makes sense. Or if there's any objection management, I want to handle it at that point, okay? And then second and final thing is people always ask us, what should I do? Are there things that I should be doing, or are there things that I should be avoiding? And if you pause at this point, you'll see people's eyes light up because they're thinking that. And that's when I say to them, and the short answer to that is yes, absolutely. What you do outside of here has a huge impact on how you progress with care inside of the office. So for that reason, we have a workshop that we're running here. It's called your Better Results Faster Workshop. And that workshop runs every second Wednesday, kicks off here at 7 p.m. So one Wednesday, what I recommend is let's just get you adjusted at 6:30, final adjustment for the evening, and you stay for the workshop straight after. And then that way you'll be out by 7:45. Okay. And I just pause that moment and get a clear agreement. So someone goes, oh, and when you deliver this properly, you will see patients will look at you and be like, that's amazing. That's fantastic that you guys run that. When's the next one? This coming Wednesday. Okay, yep, I can make that. Let's make that happen. They look at it as a value add. They look at it something like, I haven't had this before. Wow, okay, this is awesome. You guys are going to teach me how to get better results? Absolutely. I'm going to get to that. And so that's my two things script. So once I finish that visit, I take them over to our front desk team. Our CAs will then map their appointments, find what works best for them, organize their payment structure, and book them in for the first Better Result Faster workshop. So if you start off like that, what you'll find is that at that moment when someone converts into care, they're the most malleable, they absorb information the best, they have the highest vested interest to listen. And so that's the first place that we insert the importance around keeping your adjustment rhythm and making sure that we stick to the care plan and don't change, cancel, miss appointments.
That was so good. That was gold for everyone listening. I also love that you use the word momentum because I think people can understand they're looking to have positive momentum towards their goals. So that word is something that I think people can understand, that we are using the adjustments in rhythm to build momentum towards their goals and their body's healing.
Yeah, it's all about momentum. Each adjustment builds in the next, and that has a cumulative effect, which is what ultimately gets the changes for us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So good.
Yeah, love it. Now, here's one thing I was going to add. Tell me what you think about this. You can motivate and inspire people through two ways. One is the stick, one is the carrot. Okay. So the stick, would be things like your schedule policy. What happens when somebody misses adjustments without notifying us? What happens if you miss 3 adjustments in a row and we don't hear from you? This is all stick motivation. Why don't you hand the reins over to you? Take us through, all right, some stick motivation. What are some policies that you have in place from a scheduling policy, Lona? How do you deliver that? How do you enforce it? How does that look inside your office? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the carrot that we use.
Yeah. So obviously you start, like, we use this concept in multiple things when we're talking about how do you set up your business procedures, but doing things the hard easy. So starting people off with appropriate scheduling them out, getting them set up the way that the care plan designs them to be is better than going visit by visit. So if you're listening to this and you haven't been laying out a care plan and you haven't been getting people scheduled, you don't even know what your kept appointment average is, start scheduling people out, tell them what they need to hear, right? So first of all, it's starting there and trying to map out as many visits as possible. So that's done by the COCA or the checkout CA. I also emphasize, both from the doctor positioning the reeval as a very important hurdle to go to. Their first reeval is kind of like the carrot that's hanging out there, like that we're going to connect back, look at the changes we've made, the progress we've gotten to at that point, and then keep on our journey. So we want to make sure not everyone has a consistent schedule, but if we can get at least mapped out through that first reeval, I'm happy. The other part I would encourage you to do is your CAs should have a way that they easily can tell what frequency people are at. So for instance, just even that communication back and forth from what's happening in the back with the doctors and what's happening up front with the CAs, and visit by visit, whether it's in your EHR or however you're going to keep track of that whoever's walking in the doors, anyone on the team should be able to easily and quickly know, like, this person's at twice a week or this person should be 3 times a week, and know what that map looks like. And so that's a tangible action step too, is just like making sure across the team, everybody knows what compliance looks like for each patient, and where they're at in their care planning. So those are some tips to start with anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We have actually hot buttons on every patient's file, and the hot button corresponds to where they're at in care. So are they 3 times a week, initial intensive, twice a week, initial intensive, corrective once a week, wellness once a week, maintenance every other week. And so each file is tagged. So the moment that the CA is having a conversation with someone, they can look at that tag and go, oh, Lona is a once a week corrective. And they can easily in your file see, do you miss visits often? Have you changed visits often? Have you not made up visits often? So they have context for the conversation they have with you. Right?
Yep.
One of the things that we recently changed, and it instantly brought our compliance up to close to 95%, is we always had a scheduling policy, but we had to reinstate that scheduling policy. So our rules in our office are this. Number one, to change, or if you're cancelling appointments, so changing to a different day, really we require 24 hours notice in that. So we send an SMS that goes out 24 hours before, and essentially it stipulates that. So we're now within 24-hour change cancellation window. So I don't care if you change within the shift. I don't mind that. What I don't like is when my appointment book ends up looking like a cheese with all these holes in it by the time I'm finished, and that it was full when we rocked up, and then by the time we finished, there was all these people that didn't show up, change, cancelled last moment, or missed last moment. And so what we have is we have a scheduling policy where on the front end of that, we make clear agreements that first time that it happens and that you don't let us know, we get it. All right, happens to everyone. Life happens. We totally understand. All right. Second time that you miss within 24 hours without letting anyone know, and there's no notifying the office, okay, we get it. Second time things happen. Hey, we do like chocolates. We do like flowers. Hey, maybe some essential oils we can put into the diffuser. We like that kind of stuff. Okay. But the third time that happens, our third strike, okay, fees can apply. Like, discretion is obviously going to be used. And the moment that we reinstated that, introduced it, added it into our SMS reminders, it completely, for us, changed compliance, and it brought it up to like 95%. It's an example of motivation by stick, and I know we can motivate by carrot as well, but I have found that, again, I don't mind if you change within the shift, totally cool, but I do mind when we're not notified at all, there's no making up, running around chasing you, holding you accountable to the care that you're supposed to be getting for the outcome.
Bobby, I love that you use humor in that too. And I'm sure you do that with patients in that way, or whoever on your team is like offering like, hey, we have this third strike rule, you know, how you say like, of course we understand everybody makes, you know, changes to their schedule every once in a while and gets things jumbled up. They missed their first appointment, they missed a second, bring us chocolates, coffee, whatever. Like, I love that. And that's, I think, high level communication, when you can get people to understand the concept and laugh in the process, and then also remember it because they laughed, right?
100%. And I want to tell you the story. Okay, this illustrates it for me. This really drummed it home a little bit. So for Easter, it was the last day of summer here in Australia. So me, my wife, and my daughter, we hired out a hotel room in this hotel, awesome hotel. Had a rooftop pool overlooking Sydney Harbour, beautiful weather, amazing. And at about 1 p.m. in the afternoon, my wife says to me, she goes, "Oh, there's this restaurant. It's called Mr. Wong's. I've never been to this restaurant and I've heard it's so amazing, but they probably haven't got space." So she calls at 1 o'clock and she gets on the phone. I'm hearing her talk to this restaurant. And she looks at me, she goes, "Oh, they've got space. Oh, you do? You've got space? Fantastic. Oh, it's at what time?" "It's at 5:30. And she looks at me, she goes, "Oh, it's at 5:30. And this was like the last day of summer, beautiful weather. We had sunlight until like 8:30 p.m. So I look at her and I go, "Look, if you really want to get to the restaurant, no problems. Book it in. We'll make it happen." 5:30. So she books it. The lady on the phone, as she books this restaurant, high level restaurant, she says, "Okay, well, just to let you know, you're now within our 12-hour cancellation window. So if you don't show to that, okay, or if you change within this next few hours, full fees will apply, which is $150 per person. And there was three of us coming, that's $450. No problems, all good, book it in." So then I go to the pool, 2 p.m. I'm there with my book, reading, right, just relaxing, sun, playing with my daughter. 3 p.m. arrived, 4 p.m. arrived, 5 p.m. arrived. Guess what is the number one place that I want to be, where that I want to be, Lona?
The pool.
By the pool, man. Even though it's the last day of summer, okay. But at 5 o'clock, I'm like, "Oh, maybe we just change that reservation. Maybe we cancel." And then automatically another voice pops up in my head and it says, "No, $450. I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay." So at 5 past 5, I dragged my sorry behind off the pool deck, went up to my hotel room, had a shower, and got to the restaurant. And you know what? Had an amazing experience, amazing time at the restaurant. But what's the point that it illustrated for me? Here's what it is: human beings are emotional, which means even though that dinner was important, and even though I knew it was going to be great bonding for my family, in that emotional moment, "Oh, I'm comfortable, I'm good," but it was the office policy, or in this case, the restaurant policy, that got me there. But in hindsight, I'm actually super thankful that it did get me there, because I had an amazing experience, a great time bonding with my family, and I'm thankful for that. So I learned a great lesson from that, and really, that's kind of, we took a part of it into the practice. Obviously, we, like you said, added human, added some fun to it, but it's made a drastic impact on the amount of people that are keeping their adjustments and making sure they're staying on schedule.
Thank you for sharing that story. I think you just gifted us all to feel so much better about our compliance protocols.
So in my mind, I'm like, "Oh, $450. Let's get there. All right, let's do
I love that.
this."
That's a great story. And I think like when you said like, "And I'm so glad I went to dinner there." I'm so glad. It's similar to like, "And I'm so glad I kept my appointment because I'm not interrupting my ability to build momentum," right? So I think for myself, I need to hear that sometimes, because I tend to like just have too much grace for people where like, "Oh, it'll be made up. It's okay. We're going to make this happen." And recognizing it's at the detriment to what they're going to be able to, um, you know, reap the benefits for chiropractic. If they're missing their appointments, they're like sabotaging themselves. So there is a reason why having a stickler on your team that can fulfill the duties of being the person that says, "Hey, you're messing up my compliance protocol here." It's good for
Yeah,
everyone.
exactly. I love it. And then one final thing I love to touch on is, that's an example of motivating by the stick. Okay. So, oh, they got me to the restaurant by the stick. All right. However, I find that the most powerful ways to motivate human beings is by the carrot. Do you have any strategies? I've got one I can share with you guys, but I'd love to know your thoughts, Ms. Lemon. Do you have any strategies about how you get people like actually wanting to show up to the office? Obviously, they want to get the results and they want to get the outcome. But people forget sometimes on the journey. But do you have ways that you get somebody like, oh, wanting to show up and that extra bit of fire in their belly to make sure they're keeping their adjustments?
I think that it's your culture, it's your people, it's the vibe of the office. It's like when you really ooze what you stand for, people want to be in your space because it feels different than everywhere else. And you saw that through the last 4 years of chaos in the world. Like the offices that stayed open and stood for something grew and grew because people are looking for that place. And I used to ask myself, sometimes we'd have people come into the office and they just lost their spouse, like sometimes within that last 24 hours, and they'd show up to get adjusted. And I used to think, gosh, why are they here right now? And then I realized they're here because we serve life, right? Like this is what we're doing. And we're not just saying it, we walk it out. And so people feel that. So I don't think you can hack that. I think it oozes from you and your culture, and these things, these structures we put in place are there to be able to help you grow this container in a way that you can serve more people life through the elegance of chiropractic. And so I think that speaks volume when you walk into your space. How does it feel, right? And if it doesn't feel like you want, what's the barrier there? Because your clients feel that too. Your patients feel that too, right? Whether it's tolerating B players or you being a B player leader, like we can talk about that on a different episode. Like that creates energy in the office that doesn't create momentum for anyone, right?
Yeah, I think it's huge. You hit the nail on the head. The energy that you create in the office, the culture that you create in the office, the team that you hire, the way that you follow through and live with what you're telling people and what you're teaching people, the vibration frequency at which your energy is showing up with. Because we know when you're vibrating at a frequency and you become attractive, you attract people to you, and people continue to want to come into the office because they have such an amazing experience. And it creates, I like to say, a parasympathetic response for people when they go somewhere. They're like, oh man, I love going there. I just always feel amazing. I know I'm going to feel amazing in the back end of it, right? And it's just super, super powerful, helping keeping people compliant, even though they have goals. And then our job is to hold them accountable to what it requires to get to those goals. And unless something changes, then we can change the way they're holding them accountable to that.
Bobby, I want to share one last thought. If you're having trouble with people being compliant in your office, before you worry about some of your procedures, ask yourself, am I being compliant with my own adjustments myself, making sure that I'm compliant as getting on somebody's table in a regular fashion and getting my own nervous system checked. And I think sometimes we have those barriers as well.
Yep, 100%. Perfect place to finish it off. I love it. Compliance, guys, get it right. If you're someone that's sitting at 80% compliance, nail this. You'll go to 90, 95%, and you'll instantly increase your weekly volume by 10 to 15%. We might do a part 2 on this because there's a couple of other real ninja strategies here, especially around better results, faster workshop. And that's a big topic to people, like better results, faster workshop. Maybe we'll break that down in more detail in the future episodes. Lona, have an awesome time at the English this weekend. I know you guys are going to rock it. 700 BC's training. Guys, if you're listening to this, get to the next live immersion. There's a traction coming up. Get registered. We'll teach you how to attract a boatload of new patients into your office consistently every single month. Have an amazing time in Nashville. I know you're going to knock it out of the park.
Thanks, Bobby. We'll miss you. We'll send you pics.
We'll catch you at the next one. Bye. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Build Your Remarkable Practice podcast. Remember, what the world needs now is chiropractic, and what chiropractic needs now is more successful chiropractors. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, share with your friends, and leave us a review. And if you'd like to connect with us personally, please click the links in the show notes to schedule a call.